So today we're going to be talking about this. That's not in order. Yes, I gotta make another video. No, I didn't die, I'm still alive, and I've not quit YouTube as much as you wanted. I just can't find time. I had one of these first, and then I had a consecutive one after it. I just can't do anything about it, but I'm trying my best. Though in the time I've gone, I finally finished the Inkheart trilogy. I finished Inkspell and Inkdeath. So today we're going to be talking about the second book in the Inkheart trilogy, and diving back into the book with, quote-unquote, my quote, the most vivid descriptions, which is Inkheart. This is the most underrated trilogy I've ever read. The ones you hear about the most are Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, Maze Runner. These series are dominant. I've never read a series as good as this. This is the most underrated series I've ever read. The patient readers, the ones who actually waited along and read along with everyone else, who actually decided to go through this big fat book and move on to the next, finally got to experience the beautiful results of the world building that Cornelia Funke did in the first book. Because the first book was mainly about introducing everything. We didn't scratch the tip of the iceberg there, didn't even scratch the surface. So today, grab your popcorn, go for a walk, or maybe just sit down and relax, and let's start today's book talk. In the synopsis, the first book was basically all the characters from a copy of Inkheart inside the story coming out into our world. And this time is the opposite. The main characters of the story are going into the book. So you can see how well she did this. And it's such a big genre shift, because as soon as you start reading the first book, you realize it is more simple, there's not much violence, it's all based in this world. But the second book starts, you realize that they shifted it into a fantasy world. So now it's a fantasy novel. It might even replace the best fantasy novel I ever read in this video, which coincidentally was also by Cornelia Funke. Coincidence? Maybe. Yeah, okay, it is a coincidence. But this book has everything: adventure, violence, fighting, fun, and above all, romance. It picks off right where the last book, Inkheart, left off. This time, Dustfinger and Farid have a copy of Inkheart, and they're trying to find someone who can read them back into it. So they find another reader called Orpheus, who is a really important character, and he's super important in Inkdeath, and he only reads Dustfinger back into the story, saying that Farid does not belong there. So Farid quickly steals Inkheart and rushes over to Maggie's house to find her dad to tell them all of this. But what actually happens is Orpheus manages to track him down and read Maggie and Mo into the book. So now they're in the story along with Farid. Eleanor is still outside, and she's stuck with Orpheus. That's basically the gist of the story. After reading the first book, I honestly did not think it was going to get any better. And you managed to one-up the last book, Cornelia. You managed to do so well in the second book, and I'm so happy that the book turned out like this. So today we're going over the second book in the Inkheart trilogy, which is Inkspell. This book is like a well-defined game or a well-defined kingdom. It sucks you into it and explains everything in perfect order. There's a big hierarchy in this entire story, and there's an entire kingdom, so all of that needs to be explained. And the scenery that you can imagine while reading this book, the descriptions of every single thing, lead you to world build the entire thing into your head. You can do such good world building just by reading this book. The reason that I find reading the Inkheart trilogy actually interesting, and also the reason why it's so big, is that every single thing has been described in immense detail. Every single thing has been explained perfectly. There's nothing you could leave amiss in an entire scene. If the characters are standing in the room, every single thing in the room will be explained. Every single thing will be told to you, so you can picture it happening perfectly. That's why this book is so enjoyable and so amazing to read. Ever heard the saying that you read books to get out of this world? This book actually takes you into its world. Really, literally. So here's a little fun fact. American author Fritz Leiber, hopefully I pronounced that correct, coined the term sword and sorcery for this type of genre. This was back in 1961. It was in response to a letter by, I think, the British author Michael Moorcock, I think, and he was demanding a name for this type of genre of a story he had written. The previously proposed name for this was epic fantasy. In my own opinion, I find swords and sorcery way too concise, and epic fantasy would have been better. Really. But what do you think? Should there be a name for this genre? And if you would name it, what would you name it? Down in the comment section. So for those of you who don't know what the characters are and what's going on, I will play a little bit of a clip from the last book review of this series, but you can go ahead and watch that for a deep and further detailed video. So the main character, or the MC, in this book is Maggie Fallchart. She's a young 12-year-old girl who is an immense book lover, and she lives alone in a scenic cottage with her father. She has no mother. Second is Mortimer Fallchart, and he's Maggie's father, and he has the ability to drag characters out of their books. When he reads aloud, characters jump out of the page. Third is Eleanor. She's Maggie's aunt, basically. Dustfinger is another character from Inkheart, literally. And Capricorn is also another character from Inkheart, literally. And finally, Basta, or Basta I guess, is Capricorn's servant or his follower. So now if I had to explain the hierarchy, which is super important to this book because it's based in a sort of medieval era with kings and queens and all of that. So I'll go over it slowly. The first at the top we're going to place the Laughing Prince, but he's on the good side. So the Laughing Prince had a son, Cosimo, but he's dead, so we can move him out the way. Cosimo's wife, Violante, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, but Violante is actually the daughter of the evil side of the story, the Adderhead. Now the Adderhead is a horrible, daunting character, and his daughter is Violante, and she was married to Cosimo, and Cosimo is the Laughing Prince's son, who is dead. So Violante also has a son, but he's actually unimportant. Again, we can get rid of him for this book. The villain of the story is the Adderhead. Now he's supposed to be a cruel person who just doesn't have any mercy or remorse. The only thing he's afraid of is death. He doesn't want to die, and he's trying to do whatever he can, like steal people's lives, bathe in fairy blood, etc., etc., to try to get himself to live forever. He's only afraid of death, otherwise he's just the worst guy you could possibly imagine. This book keeps on getting more and more intricate. Okay, now for the storyline. The author of Inkheart in the book, Fenoglio, in the last book he went into the copy of Inkheart, and now he's inside the world. Dustfinger, it turns out, is extremely popular in Inkheart, in the world there. He is really popular. Everyone knows him, and everyone thinks that he was killed by Capricorn because he hasn't been seen for 10 years. We know what had actually happened was that just he was read out of Inkheart and he was in our world. Orpheus is an extremely repulsive character, and the scenery and world building, as I informed you, is absolutely perfect. But the people there are also repulsive. There's like perfect hierarchy. There are poor people who are starving to death, and then the rich are just having fun. Hierarchy actually matters in this entire story because, as I said, it's based in the medieval era where the kings are supposed to be the absolute rulers. Now moving on to the good points of this book and why I think personally you should buy it. This is probably the most descriptive and mind-stimulating book on the market. You probably will never read a story like this ever again, and probably you have never read anything like it before. No other book explains anything in such beautiful manner, and the way everything ties up at the end of this trilogy is absolutely perfect. I don't know how she's done it, but everything fits in a beautiful circle. Everything that we explained in the first book now comes to a full circle and ends beautifully in the third book. And that is just all the more reason for you to go and buy this book. Now, a few negative points which I found in this book, though they're not much. The first is the development on the Adderhead's character. He's supposed to be a horrible villain. Now, first of all, if he's not supposed to be a horrible villain, those were the vibes I was getting from him. And even still, those vibes were incomplete. He was not coming across as a horrible, daunting character if Cornelia wanted him to be like that. If Cornelia did not want him to be a horrible, daunting character, it was still some kind of weird middle ground. He wasn't as daunting as he should have been, but he wasn't the horrible, cold character that we see in all of these cliche books. So he was in some weird middle ground, and I just couldn't get a fix on his personality. Obviously, whenever you're describing a character, you don't need to imagine them. You need to imagine the way they walk, the way they talk. So I just couldn't pin down a good personality for the Adderhead. The second problem, as is with so many books, stories, shows across the world, you can just not pin down the age of the main characters. The children mainly are doing things that a child shouldn't be able to do. Like at the age of 12 and 13, these people should be horrified by the death and bloodshed they are seeing, these two children, Maggie and Farid. I'll give Farid the pass because he's supposed to come from an old medieval part of some other story where people are just fine killing people. But Maggie is an actual child living in today's world. I don't think any child living in today's world will be able to put up with bloodshed at the age of 12. Like, absolute massacres and death and horrifying scenes have been described in this book, and she's putting up with it. There's no effect to her mental state. Some shows and some books and some stories actually manage to capture the horrible feelings the character feels perfectly. They manage to show how horrible the character is feeling and into what depths of despair the character has gone after seeing those horrible scenes. That's just a natural reaction when you see things like that happening around you. But these kids, no, they're rock solid. They don't have any feelings. So that was one big problem. But apart from that, Maggie is sort of a regular child. Because in the third book, she starts going on all about, I don't need anyone to protect me. No, I'm not a child anymore. At the age of 14, are you mad? So again, weird vibes from that. Overall, Inkspell was an amazing book, easily rate a 9 out of 10, and I would deduct that 1 point because of the negative points I told you. Clearly, these things are taken care of in the third book because the Adderhead's character gets much more of a better personality in the third book, though the Maggie problem is still there. And putting into perspective that this book was released, I think, on 23rd September in 2003, if I'm not mistaken. And since then, this book has actually been going strong, and so many people told me to talk about this book. Is just a simple fact about how many people actually love the entire story. And I mentioned in the previous video, this has also been adapted into a film, but unfortunately that's only one film, and I hope that this book gets a proper film adaptation, the entire trilogy, in 3 parts. I feel it has so much potential to turn into a movie, and if it's done well, this might break all the other shows that have ever come out. So I'm waiting for 3 movies to come out based on each one of these books, because the fantasy, the fighting and everything will be so interesting to watch. This particular book, Inkspell, was released on 13th September 2005. So I think there's a 2-year gap between the release of each book, and all 3 were released in September of their respective years. I previously termed Dragon Rider as, quote unquote, the best fantasy novel I've ever read. So I think for now we can take that, remove it, and call this one the new best fantasy novel I've ever read. Though I think that spot still stands there for Ink Death and is waiting for me in the next video. If you stuck around till the end, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you click the subscribe button and give this video a like. It's up to you. If you enjoyed it, make sure you do these following things. You know, I wish I could read myself into books. Like, I've been doing that for years. I've been reading for years, and I finally figured out, after reading this book, that I can't pull myself into stories. So I'm waiting for someone who can come and tell me to go into a story. If there's anyone out there who can read me into a story, just find me. Just call me. I'll call you up. I need to go into this story. Or actually no, maybe Harry Potter. That'll be fun. It'll be amazing.